2, 1, and we are recording with Mr. Dean Fate, part 2
Here we go.
of The Farmer, talking about Arnie Bestwick, and I think it's best we come clean, and by we I mean me. Last week I had to cut the episode short because I had a horrible stomach bug and couldn't leave the toilet. And I told Mr. Fate afterwards, I was like, "Hey man, I gotta cut this short." I was like sweating, I couldn't focus, and I knew I was just doing a terrible job as hosting. So I was like, "How about we do another one in a week?" So I went back through, I read the book again, and but for everybody that didn't listen last week, how about you introduce yourself, man?
All right, my name is Dean Fate, and 2 years in the making almost. I wrote a book on Arnie the Farmer Beswick, and told about lots of cool stories I think about his
Yeah.
life, and starting at his birth, and there was pictures in the book as recent as 2020.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
Mr. Beswick's still alive, and today's
yes,
his birthday, correct?
yeah, 91 years young. 91 years young.
An animal. And
Yeah,
yeah, man. So I real quick question is just kind of let's just jump right into it. When you're going into the story about where he has his, I believe his two daughters in the car, and there's someone kind of like sneaking up on him and saying he wanted to get revenge.
yeah,
Is that revenge as in like a drag race or
yeah,
revenge?
exactly. But on
The the
a
the
counter.
way it was worded, I thought this guy was gonna ram into Arnie and kill him. It was like he saw revenge and was sneaking up, and I was like, "Jesus, is this about to turn into a snuff story?" But no, you meant drag racing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just out on a going leaving Morrison heading to the family farm,
Yeah.
and the guy's name is Spencer Knox, who had Chryslers and so forth, and he was gonna beat Arnie that day, because Arnie had handed him a lot of losses at the drag strip,
Mhm.
and then he didn't even accomplish what he set out to.
Yeah, and it sounds like man, it sounds like there's no good deed unpunished, right? There's so many stories of Arnie, like, helping out his competitors, like,
Oh, sure.
the proverbial help the guy up while he's down even if you're racing against him, and then no good deed goes unpunished, and I feel like other than JFK, no person has been screwed harder by politics than Arnie Beswick in terms of just like they'd go in there and everything was you're not supposed to win. Yeah, you're the lowly farmer. You're the podunk. Oh shucks, I didn't think I'd ever make it to and the big city slicker's supposed to win. And Arnie's kind of double middle fingers, like nah, man, and just runs a train on him. But time and time again, he would be yeah, I mean, the story went in last time is they'd go in and they'd go right after the race. The guy went in and like measured one of the cylinders on in Arnie right after the race. Well, what does heat do? It expands. So they go
Exactly.
in and they measure, and one of his things was 1,000th of an inch over, and
Yeah.
which is less than the width of a piece of paper. Which I mean, if you take the calipers and you just, I mean, if you just turned your arm to where the gravity's different, that would affect it.
I would think
And
so, yeah. Like I
yeah,
say, and heat does expand it, and so that's
yeah.
Arnie was in a big hurry to get out of there. So
Well, even something like that though, where it's like regardless of heat, I feel like you'd have to do multiple measurements just because when you're on that I've had a guy on here who talked about the science of measurements and they have these like these different, I guess, standards, these different like
right,
these actual like physical blocks. I don't know what their composition is, but like one guy, he works for, like, some industrial firm, and one guy, like, left him they're in Texas, and one guy, like, left him in his truck one morning, and they went to the work site, and he's like, "Do you have him?" And he's like, "Yeah," and he went and grabbed him from, like, the backseat of his truck or something, and they're like, "We can't use those." And he was like, "Why?" And it's like, "Well, you left him in your truck in the heat." But it wasn't even, like, summer, it was, like, spring, and they weren't even in the sun, they were, like, in the shade. He's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You cannot even leave them in the heat because the measurements that you're looking at are so tiny that now if you're measuring a mile and it's off by an inch, whatever, but when you're measuring down to the 10,000th of an inch, point
exactly.
is yeah, and it happened again and again, right, where Arnie would go up to him and be like, "No, no, 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 come back here," and they'd be like, "No."
Yeah. Well, we talked about it a lot last week. It was so political, so
Yeah,
political.
yeah,
So
and, man, I can't help but think, granted I'm 30 years old, coming on 31, and, I always learning and changing and evolving. When I look at something like that and it's like, oh, that's just political. They didn't want the podunk simpleton farmer. They wanted the city slicker guy, or the measurements. And it's like, oh, that's so political. That's BS. Is that maybe this is a life lesson? Is that the exception or is that the case of life? Do you go through everything? Like right now, I have a hard time getting this podcast growing because I have a lot of more conservative leaning viewpoints, which is fine. I have a bunch of liberal friends. That's whatever. That's not the scope of this podcast. But I get a lot of my stuff taken down by YouTube. You can't find my stuff in the search bar because they don't put it in the search listing. And I'm like, well, my channel would be a lot bigger if it wasn't for this politics. But it's like, I don't think there is a what I'd be in the NBA if I wasn't 5'10", Dean. But it's like, well, dude, you are 5'10". Like we
Yeah,
can
yeah,
we can sit here and talk about what it coulda, shoulda, woulda been.
right.
Is that just on a now I guess we're quickly jumping into philosophical. Is that a life lesson? You're older than me. Is that a life lesson? Is everything politics?
I think a lot of times it is. I
Damn it.
really do.
It's
It's there's everybody has their own agenda, and NHRA definitely, we're talking about the race in 1961.
mhm,
NHRA definitely had its own agenda for that race because I think we mentioned it last time that Mickey Thompson was a huge sponsor of that event, and he had like 5 or 6 entries in all those classes, and he was supposed to be the winner. You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
so
It's and you can see man, I respect the hustle of it all though, right? They're going out and they're like spreading different things. They're like, this is his home track. He's never lost a race. And then they find the other guy. They're like, this is his home track. He's never lost a race. And everyone's like, oh shit, we got to go to the race. And meanwhile, they're selling hot dogs and beer. And I'm like, I gotta respect the hustle.
oh
I gotta,
yeah, yeah,
I gotta make a buck.
yeah. I think you're talking about the Ron Lake uh,
Hmm.
match race with Don Gust out of Chicago and
Yeah.
so forth. And Ron Lake went on to be a track owner, Rockford, and then it changed his name to Byron, you know, and he just recently passed away. But back then he had aspirations for being event directors, and so he spread that word about those two, all over northern Illinois, probably southern Wisconsin, and so forth, or wherever he could.
Hmm.
And so it was huge, and that's he was the one, and he does this with a lot of racers. He gives them nicknames, and so he was the one that coined, the farmer, as it's
Yeah.
mentioned. Anybody that lived 10 miles from the Iowa border had to be a farmer.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so
And it should be noted that Arnie viewed it as a derogatory term.
oh, big time at
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, you're a simpleton. You're a
Yeah,
farmer. Again.
exactly. Second class or third class citizen.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. It's like it's 2021. I'm Irish. Whatever. If it was
Mhm.
1850 and someone said you're Irish, I'd be like, F you too, right?
Yeah,
It's need not apply.
them's fighting words. Yeah,
Exactly. And so I never thought about it when I first read it. I was like, yeah, the farmer nickname. But it's no, it was a bit of a yeah. It was, oh, you're just a lowly farmer, How'd you find a car? And it's just like, what the hell? But it's interesting that I mean, if you don't have if it's just that age old tale that's in every story from Gilgamesh to Harry Potter and the farmer is right. It's one of the levels of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, right? And it's atonement with the father. If Arnie doesn't have to like sort of make peace with his dad and different generations, right? It's like you can't paint flames on your car or you can't do this. And then if it isn't another microcosm of the time, right? What was they wanted to paint the words passionate on the side of it, and one
yeah,
of the women was like, "No, you will not." Like that
yeah,
is, that's bed talk, and it's just like, holy this is a different era, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was. And at the time, Arnie was a mechanic for working for Larry Johnson Pontiac in Clinton, Iowa, and so he got, he was told that you know, he was sure passionate about his Pontiacs, and it clicked, and so he told Larry Johnson about it, and so Larry thought it was a great idea, and he could write the whole thing off as a business expense, so he took it to the sign painter and everything like that. Well, it was his wife Darlene that thought it was a dirty, vulgar
yeah,
term and so forth. And the irony and the funny part about it was he had to sleep on the couch for like a
Yeah.
week.
Yeah, right, yeah, and it's, what was the other thing in the race where it's like somebody was cheering for someone? I didn't entirely grasp the situation,
Yeah.
and his wife
So that
smacked
was
him?
yeah, that was down in Daytona in 1960. Um,
Can can you
so
ex can you explain that to everybody listening? Can you
yeah,
explain the
absolutely.
scenario?
So one of the biggest competitors to Arnie in 1960 in Daytona at that 8-day race was the winner of the 1959 NHRA Nationals. His name was Harold Ramsey. He drove a '57 Chevy, and and so either he or his wife Thelma protested Arnie's car, and it took a telegram from Pontiac to put them down, and so Arnie could keep his winnings intact, and so on and so forth. And at the very last race of the last day, you know, everybody that's involved with either Arnie or Harold is watching the race, and obviously a big cheer goes up from the Morrison, and the his contingency of people, his fans, and so Thelma was didn't like how much enthusiasm that one guy in particular, Andy Perry, was showing, and she came over and slapped him. So, and he didn't hesitate. He slapped her right back, and so he got the term of for the whole trip back. He's the woman beater.
If that's not another sign of the times, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Pow, pow, right in the get out of here. And
Yeah,
it's just,
exactly.
yeah, it's just not another sign of the times. Um, and kind of like another, I guess, off tangent is one thing I've always kind of been interested in, not enough to actually go learn it or get a job in it, is heat dissipation. It's always been it's mainly because I like air conditioning. I just like the cold. I'm from New Hampshire. I remember in college at Valdosta State University and then the University of Georgia, I would just little things, studying all day, and the sun's coming through the windows. I'd find, okay, if I went and grabbed some cardboard out of the recycling and I'd tape it to the window, I know I could keep the radiative heat coming off, and then convection, conduction. All right, well, what if my computer right now? Computer gets hot. I'm doing editing and processing. I have a little fan under it that makes sure there's a gap between this and the table so it doesn't just stifle itself.
Right.
I've got a little like vacuum thing on it that actually sucks the heat out. I've got a big box fan right here that I turn on when I'm editing. It's just this jet of air. And another thing, I've kind of taken it to another level ever since I moved to my own apartment. I got some like cheap HVAC tubing, and I actually went and put it up on the vent in the ceiling. I like jammed a pencil through it so it stays, and then I have it snaked down, and it comes up right behind the box fan. So when I'm editing, because cooling in a computer, if you go get like water cooling, like you can go really into it. I know you're new on a Mac right now. I only use a Mac because I'm not computer savvy. If you want, I have friends that are really into gaming. You can get these like really intricate pieces that they have like copper plates because copper has the highest conductivity of heat, and
Right.
these copper plates like a radiator will be spread out, and then there'll be cycling cold water so you can water cool it, and it's like you can get really intricate. I don't do that, but I have these two metal tubes of cold air coming in, and I go in and I, instead of spending 3 grand, I spend $14, and then I go to the thermostat, and I'm like, this is my cooling system. I put it on 60, turn it on, and as I'm editing, it's 80 degrees outside, but when I'm editing, I'm wearing a hoodie because I've got it freezing in here. The point of all that is I can find, this is episode 437, I compress the video, and then I know you're probably thinking, Tommy, what the hell does this have to do with Arnie Beswick? And I'm getting there. Is I compress the video and then I drag it to iMovie, and it's got to export again. I'm too stupid to understand that. It gets really hot. And it's not just enough that it gets hot, is that it it takes time because it can't, it has like, if you ever leave your phone out in the car in the heat in the summer, it doesn't happen a lot, but
Yeah.
oh, don't test it. You might break your phone. But if you go out and leave it in the heat, you can go and pick it up, and it might actually, like, a little red triangle will come up and it will say like too hot, and it will shut itself down. And it's because
Really?
it has like a self-preservation mode where it's like the components are actually going to break irreparably, and it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you cool it down because now they're deformed. The computer will only push itself so far, and then it will stop itself. And me and my quest to just do better, I guess, there's really no moral to this. is I like to jack up the cold air so that it edits faster. And it does make a difference. If the editing goes from 2 hours to 1 hour, that's a difference. That's a lot less shit I have to pay attention
It's
to.
twice as fast. Yeah, exactly.
Purpose of that whole rant is Arnie was testing out with a new like air cooling system, correct? Was it the bump in the hood?
Oh yeah, yeah. The scoop. You're talking about the
The
scoop
scoop,
on the.
the scoop.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, the engines develop a lot of heat,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been long known that you like the cold air from outside
Yeah.
for to introduce that into the internal combustion, the engine.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that was the first thing he did was that scoop. And then, but then NHRA came along in 1962 and said if it wasn't on the car from the factory, you couldn't put it on. So in 1962, what he did is he raised up, opened the back of the hood up a little bit, a couple inches, and then he put a whole bunch of little louvers in the hood to let the hot air out of there, and then ran
I don't
tubing up to the front. You
I don't
know,
remember that.
yeah, yeah. It really wasn't talked a lot about in the book.
Okay, no, that went in. I was gonna say I don't remember that. So
Yeah,
okay, so he went in. We said, what'd you say he put in the back? You said lures, like fishing
he
lures,
opened the back of the hood up a couple inches to so that
like closer to the
the hot air
windshield.
could escape that way. And then he, on top of that, he put a whole bunch of little louvers in the hood so that it
Louvers.
could come out the top. And
What?
then he took uh, duct work, basically took out the inner headlights or one set of headlights and ran the tubing up to the front of the car that way to get the cold air that was outside into the carburetors.
What an animal.
Yeah.
What a. But so I. So what again? I'm automobile challenged. Whatever. Right.
Automotively, automotively.
Audibly.
Yeah.
Um. So you said the back of the hood, so closer to the windshield.
Right. Yep.
Right. Okay. What'd you say? We said louvers or what do you? In my mind, did you say fishing lures?
No, no, no. They're louvers. They're just little where you take a. It's a special tool, and it
Like punch a
cuts
hole?
the metal. Yeah,
Okay.
cuts it, and then so yeah, it has a little bump in the hood.
Okay. And
So
then
there are
he.
lots of these little bumps that are only like
Okay.
really big.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So yeah.
Probably 50, 75 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just add it
So
all up. Yeah.
that's what he did in 62. Yeah, yeah. So and yeah, I didn't show a lot of pictures of the if you look, there are some pictures of that
Hmm.
62 Catalina,
Yeah.
and you'll if it's from, higher enough, you can see the opening in the back of the hood and all the louvers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's so badass. And
Yeah.
that's. I mean, but that's yeah. That's early air cooling, right?
Yeah.
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 And what was the thing where it's they said that sometimes he could use the hood and sometimes he couldn't, so he brought like two hoods?
Yeah. Yeah. So occasionally, after they put that scoop on in 61, he'd go to maybe a smaller track, and the tech guys that were looking at the car said, that's not legal. You can't
Yeah.
run that. And so he learned then to have a second hood
Yeah.
that didn't have the scoop on it.
And what was the thing where it's like it had to be a factory part, so they would just like slap on a serial number or something, or they get the factory to say it was a part? What was that?
Yeah, that's what they did. That's what Arnie
Yeah.
did with that scoop. So they were working for or right at the dealership right across was a Burpee Seed with all these big Ford trucks coming in. And Don Bennett was the guy that said, "There's what we need on that big truck right there." And Arnie said, "Yeah." And of course, they knew that they had to get a part number to be legal. So Frank Barnard was the guy to go to in those days, for special equipment and all that stuff. So, they received a part number within a couple of days, and so then they went over to the Ford dealership and ordered the scoop and and put it on the car. And the first time they took it to Cordova, Bob Bartell was calling it kind of amazed at his ingenuity that he could come up with a legal part number that quick.
But it seems like that's what and again, this is my simpleton mind, not understanding racing. Um, my older brother, who was a research engineer at Georgia Tech, I remember I think he went to a NASCAR race once with a friend. And my brother did research on like jet engines for the Air Force, classified stuff. I mean, badass. And us being, spoiled city kids, we always kind of looked at NASCAR, you know, kind of looked down on it, like, oh, like NASCAR, you just right, just little assholes. And I remember he went to a race, and I remember him telling me, he was like, dude, my mind has completely changed on it. I was like, what do you mean? Like, we always poked fun at it, right?
Yeah.
Just
All,
being little brats.
all they do is
And
go around in circles, right?
but yeah, right. It's very. I mean, and I say that, I'm saying that like not proud of it. Just little assholes. Like, oh, race cars. Kind of like how they would call Arnie the farmer, right? That was that little asshole. And I remember my brother went to it. Highly intelligent guy that did research on jet engines, and he was like, dude, it is so badass. And I was like,
Yeah.
why? He was like, we were up there in like the stands, and he's like, I mean, these things are fighter jets without wings. And
Yeah.
he's like,
Yeah.
they're flinging by, and he's like, everything's rocking. And he goes, and in that moment, I realized, oh, this is what it's all about. Like the first time I went to a baseball game,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I don't watch any sports, but I remember going to a Braves game in Atlanta, and I was like, "Oh, this isn't what you see on TV." Like, and here's Kevin Smith, and you can see he's got a new bat. Bob, I was watching the game yesterday, and you're like, "What am I watching?" But then when you're there, there's no commercials, there's not panning around. You're there in the stadium, you feel everyone cheering, and and you can see the stars coming out. You can hear the crack, and it's all right there, and you're like, "Oh, this is why people watch baseball."
Yeah.
He
Exactly.
was like, "I understood why people watch NASCAR, and I've always wanted to do a race because of that." Um, that being said, it almost seems like part of the way to win, and granted, yes, you have to be a talented driver, but it seems like part of it is Arnie's ingenuity. The reason I said all of that is to say, when they do strip down the cars, when there are all of these regulations and standards, well, the mind eventually goes to, well, if everything is limited to a certain thing, then how does anyone get an edge? And it seems like the edge exists in those tiny little
Those
bits where it's like,
subtleties. Yeah.
yes, we can. How do we work within the system? Okay, well, what we can do, it's like if they test everyone in the NFL for steroids and you can't have more players on the field than other people, I mean, how do you, well, eventually, okay, maybe trick plays. You watch film, right? You try to get these little tiny just cuts up on people. And it seems like that's what it is maybe not necessarily trying to pull a fast one and you put some nitrous in there or something illegal,
Yeah.
right? Or some
Yeah.
like cartoonish, you release the tacks and the nails out the back of it, right? Some like, like some speed racer shit. But
Yeah.
instead, it is you find these little edges. Maybe it's punching holes in the hood to let the hot air out, and you put in duct work. And if you can find a way to slap it with a title of a manufacturer's piece, that in addition to practicing and like a fine honed machine with a team behind you, that is what can give you the edge.
Yeah.
And to me, just like my brother kind of saw the light with NASCAR,
Yeah.
to me, that's what your book did for me is I was like, "Oh," it was like, "Oh, this isn't, the farmer, it's like, "Oh, no, there is this subtle just find an edge." And it's like, "Oh, this is very cerebral." Like, and that I can legitimately say that your book changed my mind on that. I was like, "Oh, this is a." If you just look at football, it you can look like, oh, it's a bunch of meatheads bashing each other's heads. But then you go in and you see what they're doing. You're like, oh, this is complex chess. He's going here, calling audible switch here, and you're like, oh, this is a chess. This is a game with moving parts happening in real time. You can get an injury. You don't know what's going on. It's like, oh, this is very cerebral. So I do want to say thank you for that. Your book did change my mind on that. I was like, oh, this isn't just we're driving in a circle. It's like, dude, you're cutting off
And
thousandth of a second.
yeah, exactly. And one of the things that because he was a pioneer in racing, um, back then you just couldn't call up Jegs or Summit Racing and say, "I need this
Yeah.
part,"
Yeah.
and so they were had to be inventive with with some of the things that they were doing, so that to get that edge.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of like, Skunk Works. Do you know what Skunk
yeah,
Works is? Lockheed Martin? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
You know, when they in Ben Rich's book, Skunk Works, he was the CEO of Skunk Works, when they were at the bleeding edge, and so there was no one to call. So, they would often talk about, like, that's that's what you that's what you get when you're at the front of it, is, like, when they were making the SR-71 Blackbird, they were using it was going so fast that it would melt, so they had to use titanium. Well, one, where was the titanium ore? This is the irony. The world's leading exporter of titanium ore was the Soviet Union.
Oh, really?
So Skunk Works contacted the CIA. The CIA created 10 shell companies. The shell companies bought the iron ore or the titanium ore from the USSR, transported it through a bunch of shell companies back to the US, where then we created the SR-71 Blackbird made out of titanium from the soil of the Soviet Union to create a plane that would go photograph the soil of the Soviet Union. It's a weird circle.
Catch
But
22. Yep.
yeah, yeah. But they had to, but because they were doing that with the titanium plates, all the drill bits were like shattering.
Okay.
They had no idea how to do it. So they had to create all new tools just to work on it. And a lot of they would find weird things like using wood would actually help when they were like, I don't know how when they were driving like wedges in, just like old fat. But there are all these little things where it was off the shelf parts. Can we do this? Can we do this? Can we cycle this back in here? And it's kind of like what Arnie's doing is you don't have this $1 billion Ferrari team behind you where we're like, hey, pull up the 3D modeling. We need this made out of this. And it's like, no, it's quite literally the farmer who's just like, how about we
And
punch some holes in it?
yeah, exactly. And a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
Um, One of his good friends, Gary Wagner, that went down with Arnie to Daytona, said that it and this is not in the book, but it was like one of the things that helped make Arnie a success was he was never complacent. He
Yes.
never sat on his laurels or something like that. He said, we might try something, it might not work. If not, they'd try something else, or they go back to the original. But he was never
Always.
complacent, never
Yeah.
just sat on his hands and said it's good enough.
Yeah. Always push the edges.
Yeah,
Always.
exactly.
It's, if I may, yeah, it's not good enough that I can edit the pod. What advantage do I really get for editing the podcast in an hour and a half instead of 2 hours? None. But to me, complacency is a fate worse than death. Is just push the edge. Why? For the you know, 400 episodes in, I finally got sound panels. Why? Because if we're not getting better, what are we doing? Why are we
Yeah,
doing this thing?
yeah,
And Arnie does that. He's always, and you kind of have to when the cards are stacked against you. When you have guys that clearly don't want you, right? He had to padlock his well, there's a whole like chain of custody, right?
yeah,
It's you got to leave it in the shop overnight, and it's right, it's observed, and then it's almost like that I've had on guys here, but before, that drive armored trucks. There's like tamper proof stuff. We do that when we're sending pieces to US embassies abroad. We create tamper-proof bags that's like plastic that if you stretch it at all, it changes color. And we purposely use materials that they don't have overseas. So if it does they can't rewrap it, right? It's not like the steam in the knife and you're opening the letter like a 1950s spy.
right.
We do that to show chain of custody. And Arnie got the shaft even from there, because they would do everything and then Arnie would walk the car to the starting line and they would be like, loss of chain of custody. And he'd be like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
it's just, so when everything's stacked against you like that, it, right? It's necessity is the mother of invention. And then what Dr. Houghton says, and desperation is the drunk uncle. It's right.
yeah,
So when it's stacked again, when it's not enough that you just have to be better, he has to do things like that, right?
yeah, yeah. And obviously, because he was disqualified from the U.S. Nationals in '61, and then again in '63, there was no love between him and Wally Park's,
Yeah.
NHRA organization.
Yeah.
And so then there's that little sticker that he put on the little Tempest. coupe that said, no druids,
Yeah, yeah,
talking about Wally Parks,
yeah, yeah. And there's also, man, if Arnie's not like a character out of a movie, like the announcer's up on that, the announcer's right, he's up there and he's just kind of talking shit, kind of not false advertising, fake claim, fake news before it was
yeah,
a term. He's up there announcing to the crowd, just kind of like belittling what Arnie's automobile does, if I recall correctly, and he's kind of boosting the other guys. And Arnie, who is at this point in crutches from an
right,
accident,
yeah, yeah.
goes
This,
to the announcing like tower, walks up there, bangs on the door, goes over, grabs the microphone from the guy, and starts yelling, "That's a lie! That's a lie!"
and again, it's the same guy. It was Ron Leake, so that gave him the farmer nickname. That's doing this. He was, expanding and telling how cool Mr. Norm and Gary
Yeah,
Dyer,
yeah,
with the Mopar was, the flying ram, and Don Gay was nobody important. It was a match race, and the whole story between the match race between Don Gay and Norm is very, very interesting. Um, it was uh, I do a Pontiac Club newsletter, and it I stretched it out to seven issues with that story about the name calling and all of it's like all-star wrestling,
well, it is.
yeah. And of course, so then um, Arnie was cheering for Don Gay, his friend, and so that's why he stormed the tower and literally broke the glass and snatched the
Oh, oh
microphone
yeah.
away.
No, I left out the best part. He was banging on the. Mind you, it's not enough that he heard it and was like, "This is bullshit." It's not enough they decided to go up there. He not only that he went up there on crutches.
Yeah,
He was banging on the window. Thank you for reminding me. He was banging, and they're not letting him in. The guy's announcing. So Arnie breaks the window and unlocks it from and it's just like, and he goes in there just breathing fire on like a mission from hell, and
yeah,
just goes and takes the microphone and starts yelling. And it's a full stadium crowd, and he's just, "No, this is what it is." And it's just like, that's an animal, man. That's a guy you want on your side, right? That's
exactly. Of
that's
course, of course, so Ron Leake just absolutely, that was the
that's the
emotion he
thing.
wanted.
That's the
So
thing.
so
It's the
he's not stopping Arnie.
no,
He's just
no.
letting him talk.
And again, that comes back to you got to respect the hustle. This guy knew
Yeah,
exactly what he was doing.
yeah,
He
exactly.
wanted this thing. He wanted to build up
The
this
controversy.
yes, right? Just
Exactly.
the Undertaker versus Triple H, right? It's
Exactly.
I'm coming for you, brother. It's like he built up this thing, and
Yeah,
he wasn't cutting the microphone. He was just, almost kind of like an evil, it's like, yes, yes, building up this rivalry because I mean, ultimately, right? It's maybe this is just another lesson, right? Everything's politics, everything's also money. Got to keep the people coming there. You got to keep the people buying,
yeah,
which hey, I respect it. You got to make a hustle, right?
yeah.
It's well, you even talked about that early on. There wasn't big bucks. This wasn't right. This is like early NFL, where like in the off season, like early linebackers and quarterbacks, they'd like they'd own like a chain of supermarkets, or they'd work on like a car lot. It's because they weren't making 30 million a year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting how again the politics with the different companies, right?
sure.
Where Arnie would kind of he'd have to. There's this weird. He knew he might need a part from Company A, and he had been recently kind of wiping the floor with Company A's racer, and
Oh
so
yeah,
he had to play politics to where it was like I use Max, I love Max, but like I don't know, maybe I don't know, maybe I need a PC part. I'm not going to sit up here and like necessarily talk shit about Microsoft, right? Because I might
exactly.
need a Microsoft piece one
Yeah.
day.
Oh, you're talking about the axle puller, I think,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, of course, there was a big race at Cordova between Royal Pontiac and Arnie, and anyway, so and Arnie cleaned up on big time, and so when they were at the U.S. Nationals, then Arnie was told is like, well, you might need to get those axles out there. They have a tendency to twist and break, and so he tried unsuccessfully and that's a story in itself too. He tried unsuccessfully to get them out, and so when he was walking around, one of the Royal guys probably saw him working on his car, and like, we got to pull her at the dealership that'll get those out. And so yeah, so he had to kind of play nice with him, during the U.S. Nationals. And um, there's I didn't talk about this in the book. There are some pictures with Saturday's race with Arnie running a Royal hood, and I didn't put it in the book because I can't state for a fact that this necessarily happens, and Arnie doesn't really remember why he was running a Royal Pontiac hood on his car. It had the scoop on it, but I think by then his car did too. But here you've got this dark blue Ventura with a white and red hood that just does not match. And it's like, why did he run that hood? Well, it's my belief that that Royal came to him and said, we've got a puller, but we're hungry for attention, and you're going down the final rounds, and Royal had already been beaten, so they were out of running, but they wanted the extra attention, so they probably made Arnie a deal that said, you run our hood and we'll pull those axles out for you, and when you're up in the Detroit area next. And so that's what I think happened. But do I have proof, or anybody that remembers? No, I don't.
It's all politics and money, baby. It's all, hey Arnie, we'll do this for you, right? It's
Exactly.
all the way to the top. That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's right. It's I mean, interestingly enough, as I say all that, I don't get any money from any authors I have on here. For everybody listening, I realize I don't want them to draw that conclusion as I'm talking about it's all money and politics. Dean's not paying me. I'm not paying Dean. It's but can you? Yeah, exactly. We're just shooting the shit, man. Maybe if we get into the big leagues and I become Joe Rogan, maybe it will become all a bunch of dirty backroom deals with cigars and whiskey and scantily clad women and contracts and shell companies. Probably not though. Probably just be the same shit. Probably just talking shit, wearing crazy hoodies, right? But and I noticed your Arnie the Beswick shirt, or Arnie the Farmer Beswick.
We call this one the signature shirt.
Oh fuck yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you guys sell those?
Yeah, Arnie does. Yeah.
Oh, Arnie does. Does he have a website?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you send it to me? I'll put it in the description.
Yeah.
As I just finished saying this isn't about money, and I'm like, hey, do you have it? Right. But hey, while we're at it, I've designed hoodies. This is the newest one. Go buy the merch, everybody. You know where it is. Can we go into? I was listening to it because it is. I bought the ebook version. You were kind enough to scan me a version, but I went back and bought it. Could give you your money, and as again, it's not about the money, guys. It's all about money. For Kindle versions, because it's not on Audible, and I always scold people for that. I'm like, you gotta put it on Audible. But if you put it on Kindle, everybody listening, at least on an iPhone, you can actually listen to it. If you go into general accessibility, spoken content, speech controller, and a little thing pops up, and it's got a finger and a play button. You use the finger, touch the screen, it will start reading. But it will stop as soon as it reaches the bottom of the page, and then you got to manually do it, but nobody wants to do that. So if you use a little finger icon and you touch it, it'll start reading, then hit the pause button and hit play, it will start reading again, and then it will just start doing it. It will go for the rest of the book. Bad part about that is, and I've been meaning to say this on an episode, this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your book, is if you do that and then you close it out, because it reads what's on the screen. So if you close that out and then you pull up like your text messages, it will then start reading your text. So it's the point of all of that is I was listening to it, and I went to Walmart and I came back, and I was kind of not paying attention, but I did pay attention to. It was a really roundabout way of saying, can you go in and explain what happened when they're on some like cliffside or something, and they like flew off who was it? A car went over the edge of a cliff and hit a tree?
So they've been out in California, and so Arnie wanted to go see his brother who lived in Denver at the time. And so it's the winter, it's like February, whatever. So they were coming back through the mountains and ran into a snowstorm, obviously, and Terry Kukel is the guy that's riding with Arnie. He's crewing for him, and he was just about to tell him that he was maybe going a little bit too fast when the truck starts to jackknife, and so it sashays back and forth and so on and so forth, and the trailer literally came loose from the truck and started doing its own dance and hit the guardrail and jumps the guardrail, and so the car that was on the trailer, which was strapped down, but it still went down over the cliff a ways. And as I say in the book, the good news was that or the bad news was that a tree stopped it, but the good news was that a tree stopped it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was damaged really very, very badly, all the way almost up to the back window. And so it took them several months to get that all reworked and so forth before the car was usable again. But at least it wasn't another 500-foot down, which would have just there would have been nothing left of it.
But flattened. Yeah, absolutely. Would have probably would have come close to terminal velocity. It would have flattened, right? It's
Exactly.
Can you also go into it was you were describing something and you went in and actually said, and you're like, and I think you said like, and this may sound like exaggeration, but it was actually measured. A car flew like it somehow like went off the track or something, and it flew 100 feet. It got 30 feet in the air.
Yeah, yeah.
What was that again?
So that was the demise of the original Tiger car, and it had been named the Tameless Tiger by then. And so Arnie had and they called him Little Arnie. He was Arnie Bailing, and he was driving it down in Farmington, North Carolina. And there are two versions. Arnie Beswick is still convinced to this day that it was just Bailing overdriving the car, because he had no fear. And but there were eyewitness accounts of people at the track that thought they saw something break on the car that made it veer sharply one direction or the other, and then hit the guardrails and stuff and goes up and over and through a tree and come before it coming down again, and just destroyed the car. Obviously, in the book, obviously there's a couple pictures of the Hulk and this, but yeah, and there was another racer that said years later, well, I'll tell you, his name is Dave Binkowski. He one of the boss birds later that said Little Arnie was very, very, very hard on equipment, and he didn't stay with any one driver for very long.
Yeah.
So,
but I feel like that's a cost though of being at the front. It's like what Elon Musk calls there's a great book called Space Barons by Christian Davenport, and it's about Bezos and Musk and how they're kind of like before that we had Jobs and Gates, and maybe before that you could have like an Edison and a Tesla or a Carnegie and a whatever, right? You always have these titans going at it, which is what drives progress forward. And they have Musk's whole thing is Bezos is this very Bezos has a great saying, and it's slow is smooth and smooth is fast. It's kind of never go very slowly, but do it correctly. We'll never have to redo it.
yeah.
And so admittedly, it can take a while, but you're going very slowly and it's going to work.
Yeah.
Whereas Musk has a little more of this kind of firing from the hip type thing, accuracy through volume. And he calls explosions, I think, RUDs, rapidly unscheduled disassemblies. And but his whole thing is like, if you're not, they both have great sayings. Musk or Bezos, I use Bezos's in my own mind for like the podcast. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. One episode a day, just one episode a day. Just keep it moving forward. And then Musk's is like head down, plow through the line. It's just sort of turn it up to 11 and break through the wall. And he always talks about Musk says, we often look at history and we say, oh, whatever, iPhone tech, it'll, touchscreens will be a reality in 20 years. Or, one day we'll have electric cars, or one day we'll have gigabit Ethernet, or blah, blah, blah. And he's like, these things, they're not like planting a tree and like one day it will be here.
Yeah.
He's like, we have this misconception that, oh, well, in 20 years it'll happen. It's like, no, 20 years is what happens when you're pushing it every day. Like someone is pushing, it's not just you and I see it as, oh, now it's, 15 years ago, an iPhone was, it was the bee's knees if you had an iPhone. And now I just have one, I don't even know what it is. Screen's cracked, whatever. It's just,
Yeah.
but we don't see the Apple researchers or whoever pushing it every day. With that, Musk talks about if you're not, it's kind of like how I think it's every couple of years someone dies in Navy SEALs training,
Okay.
and obviously it's a tragedy. But the Navy SEAL, the retired Navy SEAL commander Jocko Willink, says that that's actually good because that shows that we are pushing them to the absolute limits.
Yeah.
If we're going for 10 years and no one, and you don't try to make anyone die, but at the same time, it lets you know that you're right there because you don't want to be training and be like, well, are we pushing them the hardest? Because what if they get out into the field and, they all get killed? Every couple of years when someone dies, that means, okay, we are on the edge of progress.
Oh yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
not maybe not so much drag racing, but the auto industry, has found so many safety things added to them because of racing. Either whether
Yeah.
it's car or and sometimes drag racing yet too. But the automobile industry is like, man, this really would help save lives.
Well,
So
that's what I was getting to is Musk talks about, he said billions of dollars of rockets explode over the years. But he says by pushing it to the edge, that's where we see what works. And what you're saying about Arnie being very tough on his machines, but that's where you make those incremental bits of progress, right? It's
yeah,
didn't he say like he was pushing a car or something and he was pushing it 3 times what it was said it was able to do, and that's what it led to a disaster, and afterwards he said these things should be rated for 10 times. Like my brother, the engineer, said, he said engineers they specialize in idiot proofing things.
yeah,
So he's
yeah,
like, the elevator says, maximum weight 800 pounds. He's like, I guarantee you that can hold 8,000, but they know that no one's going to do 800. A bunch of drunk guys are going to get on there and be like, I could probably hold us. And they're going to put 2,000 in, which is why it's secretly actually rated for 8,000. But you
yeah,
don't tell anyone it's 8,000 because
sure,
someone's going to go, it can hold 10. And that's when you die.
yeah,
But you said Arnie spoke about that, but that makes sense though, right? Kind of like,
yeah. You're talking about the torque converter explosion
yeah,
in the
yeah.
White Mystery Tornado. Yeah.
And that's when he got the burns, right?
Yes, he did. Yep.
Yeah.
And also that's why he was on crutches with the Great Lakes Tower. So yeah, he was still on crutches, because he got hot oil and transmission oil on him
Yeah.
and sprained his ankle, I believe.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that's why he wasn't driving, and he was there cheering Don Gay on with that match race.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. 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 He had to be airlifted out. But yeah, it's kind of interesting though, because you can kind of like the trickle down from the space race, like the technology does kind of bleed back into the public sector.
oh sure.
Um, but yeah, I guess I never thought about that, but that makes sense, right? It's how would you get testing data from, if you're designing a Honda Civic or a Suburban, and, you know, kind of like the elevator example, you do need to find out what happens when it goes 200 miles an hour, just so
Exactly.
you know.
Yeah, so they
And
they put the parts in race cars.
yeah,
And
so
yeah,
exactly. So, well, hey, instead of why, we don't have to do a hypothetical. Let's just slap it on these race cars. They're doing 200 every weekend.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
screw it, slap it on there.
Yeah,
And you see what the tolerances are and how those things can survive. And I can only imagine, well, shit, if they nailed down the safety, so, you're doing 200 and you can flip and hit a tree, well, then that's probably going to do just fine on like a Dodge Caravan, right? It does bleed back. It's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
yeah.
Um, Wrap this up in like 2-3 more minutes. Um,
Well, so uh, and you can probably, I sent you a picture
yeah,
of a
yeah,
red GTO,
yeah,
and so I didn't talk about this in the book so much, but and you can probably, when you edit this together, put that JPEG in there.
yeah,
So when Arnie started working on his 66, pretty much the Tiger car was all he was driving. The Mystery Tornado was just sitting in the shop or whatever, in the garage. And so he took and he used the back half of the frame for the Mystery Tornado to build the 66 star of the circuit. And so that left the body, and he had given the aluminum front end to Bailing for his services. But that still left the rest of the body sitting on sawhorses or something like that in the shop. So he was approached by uh, Bill, God, what's his last name? I can't even remember his name. Oh, Forbes, Bill Forbes, who was a stock car racer out of Sterling Rock Falls. And so Arnie either sold or let him use the body, and they painted it red, and it said sponsored by Arnie Beswick on it for a while and so forth. But they turned it into a stock car, and the picture that I sent you, which you'll see,
hmm.
was from 1969. So that went into probably 1970, 71, 72 or something like that, before it probably was so dented up and whatnot that it just was not
I'm gonna
usable anymore.
I'm gonna pull it up right now.
And
Um,
anyway, so when Bill Forbes,
yeah.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's Bill in the car. So anyway, when Bill came over to pick up the car, um, it was the body. We had no sound sealer, no dum dum or anything like that in it. And so Bill said he'd never picked up a lighter car in his life, and it only took 4 people to lift up the whole body.
Jesus. Well, I mean, that's right, but that's what it has to be,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
That's insane. Yeah, I did want to wrap this up on but you have a very special relationship with Arnie, right? I mean, you call him
Yeah,
dad.
yeah. Like I said, I when I did that video on back in '96, that's when I really, really, really got to know him
Yeah.
really well. And then, like I said, we stayed so much in touch. He's like a father to me. He
That's
really is.
well, that's awesome, man. So, I mean, what better way to end this than well, happy birthday to your dad. Happy birthday, Mr. Beswick. 91 years young. I'm
That's
30.
right.
I'm 30. I hope I can do half that time, and I hope I can do half the shit. I don't even know if I want to do half the shit you did. I mean, I drive like a grandmother, so maybe not. Maybe that's a
Yeah,
bad example.
yeah,
So it's the subjective of adventure. I hope I have a
exactly.
subjective adventure like you. Maybe not the cars, maybe not the burning fluids and all that stuff, but you know, maybe I can conjure up my inner Arnie. Maybe I can maybe get the computer to work a little faster. Jack up the air condition. Maybe that's the takeaway from this. Is the first two takeaways are everything's politics and everything's money. So what's the third takeaway? What's the solution to the problem? Because anybody can propose a problem. So what's the solution we can say? Conjure up your inner Arnie. And instead of bitching about how unfair things are and how things may be stacked against you, use that as fuel, take their insult, turn it into your nickname, try to cut the corners in the most legal but uh, intuitive and inventive ways, and then go down as a legend.
Yep,
And I think
absolutely.
that's what we all need is our inner Arnie.
That's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Happy birthday, Mr. Beswick. Highly
Yep.
doubt you're watching, but on the off chance that you are, happy birthday, Mr. Beswick. Dean Fate, author of The Farmer, the story about Arnie Beswick, an absolute madman who's still alive. Today's his 91st birthday, which
Yep.
is insane. Guys, seriously, go read the book or listen to it like I did. You can do it on your Kindle or you can do it on the Kindle app on any device. And it's a real life Talladega Nights. This guy's insane and he pioneered all of it. He pioneered all of it. Again, we can always go back and say, well, we know that this happens now, but it's like the guys who first went to the moon. No one knew what the hell was going to happen.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
had they had prepped speeches for if they didn't come back. They already had them written and on the table that the president would read if they didn't come back. And that's what Arnie did, but he did it with racing. And it's absolutely insane. And it's inspiring. The dude took the thing that he loved. I mean, I can identify with that with this podcast. He took what he loved. There was no big money in it. He lived on a house paid for by his dad, and he just kept going at it, and he kept working at it, and there'd be setbacks, and he never threw in the towel, and he never said, "Oh, well, I guess that's it. I guess it's just not fair."
Exactly
No,
right.
he just turned it up to 11 and would go so fast that he almost died. And then he did almost die, and he came back after being airlifted, had ice water put on his burns, came back in crutches, broke through a window, and still stuck up for his name. I mean, if that's not the man we should all strive to be, is protect your kingdom and that which you love. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be 91 and still pulling 200 miles an hour in a drag racer.
Absolutely. He is still passionate about his Pontiacs.
What an animal.
Yeah.
You should try to get him on here. You should try to sit him down in front of a camera.
Well, obviously, when I'm not in Las Vegas, I'll have to
Obviously.
do that when I'm back in Moline, but we'll
Yeah,
have
yeah,
maybe work
yeah.
out. Yeah.
You should talk to him. Maybe you could be his chaperone. You could sit there with him.
Yeah,
Maybe he won't be interested. I don't know. But I
he
think that would
probably would
definitely
be.
I think that would be really cool. If you could get him on there, I would like to have you present because I think I would be intimidated. So, Dean,
Uh, So
you can
easy
be
to talk to. He
okay.
is so easy to talk to.
Okay. All right. Well, that honestly, that would be badass. I'd love for you to get him on here.
Yeah.
Don't feel obligated. Not to put you on the spot like that. Do it, Dean.
Yeah,
It's
really.
do it, and I'll only be happy if you do it.
Yeah, really.
But guys, the book will be in the description. It's a great book. As I've said, I'm not even someone interested in racing or sports or any of that, but I found it interesting, and because there are real life lessons to take away from it. I'm never gonna race. I'm not gonna get into racing because of this book, but there are lessons. You know, if the world's stacked against you, you can sit there and pout and say, "Well, I guess that's it." Or no, you can do the metaphorical equivalent of drilling holes in the hood to make your car go faster. Drill the holes in your hood.
Yeah,
If someone measures your metaphorical engine in the metaphorical race of life and they screw you, drill holes in the hood and go faster.
that's right.
That's all I got from this.
Amen. Yep.
Mr. Fate, thank you so much for coming on here, sir. And we'll have
Thank
to
you.
do it again sometime. I'll send you an email when it's up. Definitely float it to Arnie. See
Yeah.
if we
Oh, I
can.
will.
All
So
right.
yeah, the last one I sent to his daughters and so forth, and
Awesome.
so yeah.
Well,
So
that might not have been the best one to send. I was sitting here squirming and sweating as I had diarrhea, and I was like, I gotta finish this thing up. And that was the
yeah.
first time Dean and I ever spoke. So he was probably like, "The hell's wrong with this guy?" And I was like, "So
So you were.
this is the full podcast experience. This is what it was supposed to be last time."
There we go.
All right, Dean.
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming on here, sir. I'll email it
Thank
when
you
it's
for having me.
uploaded. And guys, I hope you enjoyed it. God bless. Stay safe, everybody. We live in the best nation on earth. Don't ever forget that. And have a good weekend, everybody. Dean, take care, my man.
Thank you. You too.
All right, buddy.